A man pulled a lion's body out of a ditch. What happened next was unbelievable. The golden form lay crumpled at the bottom of the erosion ditch, motionless against the red earth that had claimed so many during the night's relentless storm. Ranger David Mbeki stood at the edge, his weathered hands gripping the radio that had guided him here after reports of strange tracks leading toward the ravine. The morning light revealed what he had feared most, another casualty of the seasonal rains that carved new wounds across the landscape each year. 20 feet below, the lion's massive frame seemed impossibly still. His tawny coat darkened with mud and debris from the flash flood that had swept through hours earlier. David's eyes traced the powerful shoulders, the thick mane now matted against the animal's neck, searching for any sign of movement that might contradict what appeared to be another tragedy in this unforgiving wilderness. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant call of a fish eagle and the soft drip of water still seeping from the fractured walls of earth. David had walked this territory for 15 years, had seen lions emerge from impossible situations with their dignified strength intact. But something about this scene felt different. The way the animal lay suggested a fall from great height, perhaps during the chaos of the storm when the normally sure-footed cats could be caught off guard by shifting ground and rushing water. His radio crackled with static, but he ignored the distant voices of his colleagues, unable to pull his gaze away from the magnificent creature below. The ranger's training told him to call for backup, to follow protocol for wildlife recovery, but something deeper urged him to bear witness to this moment alone. He studied the lion's position, noting how the great head rested against a small outcrop of stone, how the powerful legs were folded beneath the body in a way that suggested the animal had tried to right itself before succumbing to whatever injuries the fall had caused. The morning air carried the scent of wet earth and the lingering electricity of the departed storm. David moved slowly along the rim of the ditch, searching for the safest descent route while his mind calculated the logistics of what lay ahead. The walls were steep but manageable, carved smooth by water and time into natural footholds that could support his weight. He had performed these grim recoveries before, understood the importance of treating each fallen animal with the respect their wild majesty deserved. Even in death, as he prepared to make his descent, David allowed himself a moment to truly see the lion as he had lived, lord of this territory, apex predator whose very presence had shaped the behavior of every other creature for miles around. The rangers had known this particular male, had tracked his movements and documented his interactions with the pride that roamed these boundaries. His loss would ripple through the ecosystem in ways both visible and subtle. "Easy now," David whispered to himself, more ritual than necessity, as he swung his legs over the edge and began the careful climb down into the ditch. Each foothold brought him closer to the still form, closer to the moment when he would need to confirm what his heart already knew. The earth beneath his boots was soft from the night's rain, requiring deliberate placement of each step as he descended toward the lion's resting place in the shadows below. David's boots found purchase on a ledge of compacted clay, and he paused to steady himself before continuing his descent into the narrow ravine. The walls rose higher around him with each careful step, transforming the morning light into something softer, more sacred, as if he were entering a natural cathedral where this great life had come to rest. His breathing remained controlled despite the weight settling in his chest, the knowledge that he was approaching one of nature's most magnificent creatures in its final stillness. The lion's massive form grew larger as David drew closer, and he could now see the individual whiskers on the great muzzle, each one perfectly formed despite the mud that clung to the animal's face. The ranger's hands moved instinctively to check his equipment, the canvas tarp folded beneath his arm, the rope secured to his belt, the radio that would summon the recovery team once he confirmed what needed to be done. Every item felt heavier than usual, weighted with the solemnity of the task ahead. As his feet finally touched the floor of the ditch, David found himself standing less than an arm's length from the fallen king. The lion's body stretched nearly 8 feet from nose to the base of his tail, the powerful muscles still visible beneath the coat that spoke of years ruling these territories. Up close, the animal's sheer size commanded reverence even in death. Each paw larger than David's open hand, the dark mane thick enough to hide secrets of countless hunts and territorial battles won. David knelt slowly beside the lion's head, his movements deliberate and respectful, as if approaching a sleeping monarch who might wake at any disturbance. The ranger's weathered fingers hovered inches above the great cat's neck, searching for the courage to make contact, to confirm what his eyes had already told him from the rim above. The morning air felt thinner here in the depths, charged with something he couldn't name but recognized from other moments when life and death stood balanced on invisible scales. The lion's eyes were closed, the long lashes darker against the golden fur, giving the impression of peaceful sleep rather than the violent end the storm might have delivered. David noticed how the animal's front legs were positioned naturally, not twisted or broken as he might have expected from such a fall. Perhaps the end had come gently, exhaustion claiming the great heart after a struggle against rising waters that even a lion's strength couldn't overcome. "Rest easy, old king," David whispered, his voice barely audible in the enclosed space, the words carrying years of respect for the wild creatures who shared this harsh landscape with humans who tried to understand their ways. His hands trembled as he reached for the canvas tarp, unfolding it with quiet efficiency born from too many similar moments in his career as a ranger. The morning had taken on a timeless quality, as if he and the lion existed outside the normal flow of hours and obligations, connected by this final act of service that would see the magnificent animal treated with the dignity his life had earned. David positioned himself to begin the careful work of moving the lion's body, his muscles tensing in preparation for the substantial weight he would need to manage. The great cat's fur was still warm where it had been protected from the night air, a detail that made the ranger pause and consider the possibility that death had come only recently, perhaps with the first light of dawn. He adjusted his grip, preparing to honor this creature's passage from the wild kingdom he had ruled to, whatever realm awaited beyond the morning's quiet shadows. David's hands had barely made contact with the lion's powerful shoulder when something impossible stopped his movement entirely. Beneath his palm, so faint it might have been imagination, was the gentlest rise and fall of the massive ribcage. The ranger's breath caught in his throat as he pressed his hand more firmly against the golden fur, feeling for confirmation of what his heart desperately wanted to believe. There, beneath the thick coat and powerful muscles, was the steady rhythm of a heart that refused to surrender. The discovery sent tremors through David's weathered frame as he repositioned himself beside the great cat's head, his training as a wildlife conservationist taking over even as wonder flooded his system. The lion's breathing was shallow but unmistakable, each inhalation barely lifting the broad chest, each exhalation so subtle it seemed to merge with the morning air itself. What had appeared to be the stillness of death was instead the deep unconsciousness of a creature whose body had shut down to preserve what remained of its strength. David's eyes moved with new purpose across the lion's form, searching for injuries that might explain the animal's condition. The left hind leg lay at an unnatural angle, suggesting trauma from the fall, while a thin line of dried blood traced from behind one ear down to the base of the thick mane. The ranger's experienced hands hovered over these areas without making contact, understanding that premature examination might cause more harm than good to a creature already balanced on the edge of survival. The morning light shifted as clouds moved overhead, casting dancing shadows across the lion's face and revealing details that David's grief had obscured during his descent. The great cat's nostrils fluttered with each breath, and the tip of his pink tongue was barely visible between slightly parted jaws. These were the signs of life that every ranger learned to recognize, subtle indicators that separated the living from the lost in the unforgiving mathematics of the wild. David reached for his radio with hands that now moved with careful urgency rather than somber resignation. The veterinary team would need to be contacted immediately, along with the specialized equipment required to safely extract a living lion from the confines of the narrow ravine. Every minute of delay could mean the difference between recovery and an ending that the morning had seemed to promise but was now holding in abeyance. "You're still fighting," David whispered to the unconscious lion, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and growing hope that transformed the atmosphere of the ditch from a tomb into something closer to a sanctuary. The ranger positioned himself to provide shade for the great cat's head while maintaining constant watch over the subtle movements that marked each precious breath. The lion's unconsciousness appeared deep and complete, offering no response to David's presence or voice, but the steady rhythm of respiration suggested a body that was healing rather than failing. The powerful frame that had seemed so diminished in apparent death now radiated the potential for recovery, each breath a small victory against the forces that had brought this magnificent creature to the bottom of a storm-carved ravine. Time took on a different quality as David settled into his vigil, understanding that he was now guardian to a life that hung suspended between the world of the conscious and something deeper, where the lion's wild spirit waged its private battle for survival. The morning stretched ahead with new possibilities, fragile as spider silk, but real as the heartbeat beneath his palm. The veterinary team's arrival brought calm efficiency to the ravine, but it was David who remained closest to the lion as the hours unfolded with agonizing slowness. Dr. Sarah Chen had descended with her medical kit and portable equipment, conducting a thorough examination that revealed a severe concussion and the suspected broken leg, but no internal injuries that would prevent recovery. The decision was made to treat the lion in place rather than risk the trauma of immediate extraction, a choice that meant David would become the primary caretaker for a creature who could kill him with a single swipe of those massive paws the ranger had fashioned, a shelter using the canvas tarp and several branches, retrieved from above, creating a small area of shade that would protect the lion from the intensifying afternoon sun. Every movement around the unconscious animal was deliberate and quiet, understanding that the great cat's heightened senses would register their presence even in his current state. David positioned himself within reach but never directly over the lion, respecting the invisible boundaries that wild creatures maintained even in their most vulnerable moments. As the day progressed, subtle changes began to emerge in the lion's condition. His breathing deepened slightly, becoming more regular, and occasionally his ears would twitch at distant sounds, the call of a hornbill, the rustle of wind through the acacia trees above. David learned to read these small signs like a language, each flicker of response offering hope that the great cat's consciousness was slowly surfacing from whatever depths had claimed it during the night's ordeal. The ranger's vigil became a meditation of sorts, hours passing in quiet observation and gentle care. He used a soft cloth to clean the dried blood from behind the lion's ear, working with the patience of someone who understood that healing happened on nature's timeline, not his own. When the afternoon heat grew oppressive, David used his water bottle to moisten the lion's muzzle and gums, tiny drops that were absorbed immediately by the dry tissue. The first real sign of returning awareness came as shadows began to lengthen across the ditch floor. The lion's eyelids fluttered, not quite opening but acknowledging light in a way they hadn't done all day. David felt his heart accelerate at this small miracle, even as his training kept him motionless and calm. The great cat's head shifted almost imperceptibly, and for a moment one massive paw twitched against the earth. "Easy now, big fellow," David whispered, his voice barely audible even in the confined space of the ravine. The lion's recovery continued in increments so small they might have been missed by a less patient observer. His breathing strengthened throughout the late afternoon, and once David was certain he saw the tip of the pink tongue emerge to moisten the dark lips. These were the building blocks of consciousness, the slow reconstruction of awareness that would eventually return this magnificent creature to full strength. As evening approached, David found himself settling into a rhythm that felt ancient and natural, the kind of interspecies cooperation that had existed long before humans learned to build walls between themselves and the wild world. The lion remained unconscious but stable, his body beginning the long process of healing while David maintained his quiet watch. Trust was building in the silence between them, measured not in words or gestures but in the simple fact that David remained present, offering protection and care to a creature who represented everything powerful and untamed about the African wilderness. The first golden rays of late afternoon, Light filtered down into the ravine when the lion's eyes finally opened. David had been adjusting the makeshift shelter when he noticed the change, the way the great cat's breathing shifted from the deep unconsciousness that had claimed him for nearly 12 hours to something lighter, more present. The amber eyes that emerged from behind heavy lids were unfocused at first, blinking slowly as consciousness returned like tide flowing back across empty sand. The lion's massive head lifted slightly from the earth, and David felt his own breath catch at this first real sign of recovery. Those golden eyes moved with growing clarity, taking in the strange surroundings of the narrow ditch, the canvas shelter above, and finally settling on the human figure who had maintained vigil throughout the long day. There was no fear in that ancient gaze, only a profound weariness and something deeper that David recognized as the fundamental dignity that separated wild creatures from those who had forgotten their origins. What followed was a slow resurrection that David would remember for the rest of his life. The lion's powerful forelegs shifted, finding purchase against the packed earth as he began the careful process of rising. His injured hind leg remained tender, causing him to favor it as he moved, but the great cat's determination was unmistakable. Each movement was measured and deliberate, the actions of a creature testing his returning strength against the demands of standing upright once more. David remained perfectly still as the lion completed his rise to full height, understanding that this moment balanced on invisible threads that could snap with the slightest wrong movement. The great cat stood nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, his magnificent mane catching the filtered sunlight and transforming it into something that seemed to glow from within. For several heartbeats, neither man nor beast moved, each taking the measure of the other in a silence that felt sacred. Then the lion took a single step forward, his massive paw landing less than 3 feet from where David knelt. The ranger's training screamed warnings, but something deeper kept him motionless as those amber eyes found his and held them with an intensity that seemed to bridge the vast evolutionary distance between their species. In that gaze, David saw not gratitude, for wild creatures did not think in such human terms, but rather a profound acknowledgement of what had passed between them in this place. "Go well, brother," David whispered, his voice carrying years of respect for the untamed world that had shaped his life. The lion's head turned toward the gentler slope that led up and out of the ravine, his body moving with returning grace despite the lingering effects of his injuries. David watched as the great cat began his ascent, each step deliberate and sure, the powerful muscles beneath that golden coat working in harmony to carry him back toward the freedom he had never truly lost. At the rim of the ditch, the lion paused for one final moment, his silhouette magnificent against the darkening sky, before disappearing into the thorn bush that marked the beginning of his vast territory. The evening wind stirred the grass above the ravine, carrying with it the distant calls of his pride, and David knew that some connections transcend the boundaries between species, leaving marks on the soul that time cannot erase. In the growing darkness, the memory of those amber eyes would remain, a reminder that grace can emerge from the deepest shadows.